Maria never expected her Tuesday morning coffee run to change everything. She stood in line at the small neighborhood cafe, watching her 8-year-old son Danny stare blankly at the floor tiles. For 3 months now since the accident, Danny hadn't spoken a single word. The doctors said it was selective mutism brought on by trauma. Maria preferred to think of it as her son choosing silence over a world that had suddenly become too loud and frightening. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Maria glanced up to see a tall man with gentle eyes enter with a boy about Danny's age. The man moved with quiet confidence, his hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder. What caught Maria's attention wasn't the man himself, but the way his son looked around the cafe with bright, curious eyes despite the hearing aids visible behind both ears. "The usual, Mr. Chen?" asked Sarah, the barista who knew every regular customer by name. "Please," the man replied, his voice carrying a slight accent. "And maybe one of those chocolate muffins for Lucas here." The boy, Lucas, grinned and began moving his hands in quick, fluid motions. Maria realized he was using sign language. Mr. Chen watched his son's hands intently, then nodded and turned back to Sarah. "He says he'd prefer the blueberry one today, and he wants to know if you have any new books in the reading corner." Sarah laughed. "Tell him we got 3 new picture books yesterday. He can check them out after you order." Maria watched, fascinated, as Mr. Chen's hands moved in response. Lucas clapped silently and hurried toward the small reading nook the cafe maintained for families. What struck Maria most was the complete lack of frustration or sadness in either father or son. They communicated as naturally as breathing, their silent conversation flowing with an ease that made her heart ache for her own son. Danny had been watching too, she realized. For the first time in months, his eyes held something other than vacant emptiness. He was studying Lucas with an intensity that made Maria's breath catch. When Lucas looked up from selecting a book and caught Danny watching, he smiled and waved. Danny didn't wave back, but he didn't look away either. "Danny," Maria whispered, crouching down beside her son. "Would you like to sit in the reading corner while I get our order?" Danny's eyes flicked between Maria and Lucas. Then he gave the smallest nod. It was the first response to a question he'd given since the accident. Maria's heart hammered as she guided Danny toward the reading area, trying not to make too big a deal of this tiny breakthrough. Lucas was already absorbed in a book about dinosaurs when Danny settled into a nearby chair. Mr. Chen approached with his coffee and settled into a chair where he could keep an eye on both boys. He opened a tablet and began working, occasionally glancing up to check on Lucas. Maria ordered her coffee and a hot chocolate for Danny, stealing glances at the reading corner. Lucas had noticed Danny's interest in his book and had turned it so both boys could see the pictures. He pointed to a T-Rex and looked at Danny with raised eyebrows as if asking what he thought about it. Danny studied the picture seriously, then pointed to a smaller dinosaur on the same page. Lucas's face lit up, and he began signing something elaborate, his expressions animated and excited. Even without understanding sign language, Maria could tell he was telling some kind of story about the dinosaurs. "He's explaining that the smaller dinosaur was actually much smarter than the T-Rex," Mr. Chen said quietly, appearing beside Maria at the counter. "Lucas loves dinosaurs, and he's convinced that intelligence beats size every time." "Your son seems wonderful," Maria said, accepting her drinks from Sarah. "I'm Maria, and that's my son Danny." "David Chen," the man replied, extending his hand. Lucas lost his hearing when he was 4 due to meningitis. It was terrifying at first, but children are remarkably adaptable. We learned sign language together, and he's never let it slow him down. Maria hesitated, then found herself sharing more than she intended. "Danny hasn't spoken since a car accident 3 months ago. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with his vocal cords. He just stopped talking." David's expression softened with understanding. Trauma affects everyone differently. Sometimes the world becomes too overwhelming and silence feels safer. They stood together, watching their sons. Lucas was now showing Danny how to sign the word for dinosaur, patiently repeating the gesture. When Danny's first attempt wasn't quite right. Danny's forehead was creased with concentration, but there was something alive in his expression that Maria hadn't seen in months. Lucas comes here every Tuesday morning before his special education classes start, David said casually. It's become our routine. He likes the quiet atmosphere and the books. Maria felt a flutter of hope. We might start coming. On Tuesdays, too. Danny seems to like the reading corner. When it was time to leave, Lucas waved goodbye to Danny and signed something with a questioning expression. David translated. He's asking if Danny will be here next week to look at more dinosaur books. Danny looked at his mother, then back at Lucas. After a long moment, he nodded once, firmly. As they walked home, Maria noticed Danny's steps had a little more energy than usual. He kept looking back toward the cafe, and twice she caught him attempting to copy the hand gesture Lucas had shown him for dinosaur. That night, for the first time since the accident, Danny fell asleep without the nightmares that usually plagued him. Maria sat beside his bed, watching his peaceful face and thinking about the gentle man and his son, who had somehow managed to crack open the shell Danny had built around himself. She didn't know if this was the beginning of Danny's healing, but it felt like the first real spark of hope she'd had in months. Sometimes she realized the most powerful connections happen in complete silence, understanding passing between souls without need for words. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. The second Tuesday arrived with an unexpected challenge. Danny woke up with fever and a stuffy nose, clearly coming down with something. Maria's heart sank as she took his temperature and realized there was no way he could go out today. She had been counting on this cafe visit more than she cared to admit, and she could see the disappointment in Danny's eyes when she explained he was too sick to leave the house. Around 10 in the morning, her doorbell rang. Maria opened it to find David Chen standing on her doorstep with a gentle smile and a small bag in his hands. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, he said. Lucas was very concerned when you didn't show up at the cafe. He insisted we find out if Danny was okay. Maria felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected kindness. He's got a cold. I was so disappointed we couldn't make it. Lucas thought Danny might be sick, David said, holding up the bag. He picked out some books from the cafe's lending library and asked Sarah to make some of her special honey tea. He remembered you mentioning Danny liked the reading corner. Before Maria could respond, Lucas appeared from behind his father, carrying a larger bag and wearing a concerned expression. He looked up at Maria with questioning eyes, then signed something to his father. He wants to know if Danny is feeling very sick, and if it would help if he shared some of his favorite books, David translated. Maria invited them in, warning that Danny might still be contagious. David waved off her concerns, explaining that Lucas had a strong immune system, and they weren't worried about a common cold. They found Danny curled up on the living room couch, looking miserable with red-rimmed eyes and a box of tissues nearby. When he saw Lucas, his expression brightened considerably. Lucas immediately went to his bag and pulled out 3 picture books, arranging them carefully on the coffee table where Danny could see them. Lucas then began signing something elaborate to Danny, his face animated despite the serious topic. Danny watched intently, clearly trying to understand. Lucas is explaining that being sick is hard, but books make everything feel better. David translated quietly for Maria. He's telling Danny about a time when he was very sick after his surgery to get hearing aids and how his grandmother read to him for hours. Lucas picked up one of the books, a colorful story about a brave little mouse, and opened it to the first page. He showed the picture to Danny, then began telling the story through sign language, his expressions changing for each character. Even without sound or spoken words, his storytelling was captivating. Danny was completely absorbed. He leaned forward, studying Lucas's hands and facial expressions with intense concentration. When Lucas paused and looked at him encouragingly, Danny hesitantly tried to copy a simple sign. That's the sign for brave, David explained softly. Lucas is teaching him the important words in the story. Maria made tea for the adults and brought Lucas a glass of juice. As they settled in to watch the boys, David shared more about their journey with Lucas's hearing loss. The first year was the hardest, he admitted. I was so focused on what Lucas had lost that I almost missed discovering what he was gaining. Sign language opened up a whole new world for both of us. It taught me that communication goes far beyond just speaking. Danny used to be so talkative, Maria said, watching her son attempt another sign. He would tell me stories about everything. What he saw on the way to school, what he dreamed about, what the clouds looked like. The silence has been the hardest part. But look at him now, David pointed out. He's communicating with Lucas more than he has with anyone in months, isn't he? Maria realized he was right. Danny was leaning close to Lucas, nodding and shaking, his head in response to questions, pointing to pictures, and even attempting to sign back. It was more interactive than he'd been since the accident. Lucas finished the first story and immediately picked up the second book. This one was about a family of bears who had to find new ways to talk to each other during a snowstorm that made it impossible to hear. Lucas seemed to have chosen his books very deliberately. As Lucas told this story, he began incorporating Danny into the narrative. He would point to Danny when the story mentioned the youngest bear and encourage him to sign the bear's emotions: happy, scared, excited, sleepy. Danny's attempts were clumsy at first, but Lucas was endlessly patient, gently correcting Danny's hand positions and celebrating every success. By the time they finished the second book, Danny's fever seemed to have broken. His cheeks were less flushed and he was sitting up straighter. When Lucas suggested they act out parts of the third story, Danny actually smiled for the first time in weeks. The third book was about friendship between a hearing child and a deaf child who met at a playground. Lucas assigned Danny the role of the hearing child and himself the role of the deaf child. They acted out scenes from the book, with Lucas teaching Danny basic signs for playground equipment and emotions. The most magical moment came when Lucas signed friend and pointed to Danny, then to himself. Danny understood immediately. He carefully copied the sign, pointing first to Lucas and then to himself. Both boys grinned, and Danny's smile was the biggest Maria had seen since before the accident. When it was time for David and Lucas to leave, Lucas gave Danny a small notebook and a pencil. He demonstrated how Danny could practice the signs he'd learned by drawing pictures and writing the words underneath. Danny clutched the notebook like it was treasure. At the door, Lucas hugged Danny goodbye, another first since the accident. Danny hugged back, whispering so quietly that Maria almost missed it. "Thank you." David heard it too, and his eyes met Maria's with understanding. Danny had spoken his first words in 3 months. After they left, Danny spent the rest of the day practicing his signs in front of the mirror and drawing pictures in his new notebook. That evening, he looked up at Maria during dinner and signed, "Thank you," the way Lucas had taught him. Then, in a voice rusty from disuse, he said, "Lucas is my friend." Maria had to excuse herself to cry happy tears in the kitchen. Her son was finding his voice again, one silent moment at a time. The following weeks brought a transformation that amazed everyone who knew Danny. The Tuesday cafe visits became the highlight of both boys' weeks, but their friendship had grown beyond those scheduled meetings. David had given Maria his phone number, and the families began spending time together outside the cafe. Danny's notebook filled with drawings and sign language practice. He carried it everywhere, showing anyone who would look his growing vocabulary of signs. His speech therapist, Dr. Martinez, was astounded by his progress during their Thursday sessions. "I've never seen anything like it," she told Maria after Danny had spent the entire session chattering about his new friend Lucas. 3 weeks ago, he wouldn't respond to simple yes or no questions. Today he told me a 10-minute story about dinosaurs and demonstrated 12 different signs he's learned. The breakthrough moment came during their 4th Tuesday together. Danny and Lucas were settled in their usual spot in the cafe reading corner when 3 older boys from Danny's school walked in with their mother. Maria recognized them immediately: Tommy, Jake, and Michael, who had been in Danny's class before the accident. "Hey, look, it's Silent Danny," Tommy said loudly, pointing toward the reading corner. "Mom, that's the kid I told you about who doesn't talk anymore." Maria felt her protective instincts flare, but before she could intervene, something remarkable happened. Danny stood up from his chair and walked directly over to the 3 boys. His small shoulders were squared with determination Maria hadn't seen since before the accident. "My name is Danny," he said clearly, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "I do talk. I also know sign language now. The three boys looked surprised. Tommy recovered first, his tone still mocking. Sign language? That's weird. Why would you learn that? Lucas had followed Danny over, and now he stepped beside his friend. He looked directly at Tommy and began signing while Danny translated. Lucas says sign language isn't weird, it's beautiful, Danny interpreted, his confidence growing with each word. He says it's another way to share thoughts and feelings and that people who think it's weird probably just don't understand it. Jake, the youngest of the three, looked curious despite himself. What did he just say? He asked, pointing to a gesture Lucas had made. He asked if you want to learn how to sign your name, Danny replied, then added without prompting. Lucas is my best friend. He's teaching me that there are lots of different ways to communicate and they're all important. The boy's mother had been watching the exchange with growing interest. She approached the group with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry if my sons were rude, she said to Danny. You're absolutely right about sign language being beautiful. My grandmother was deaf, and I always regretted not learning to communicate with her better. Lucas, understanding the tone if not all the words, began signing something to Danny. Danny grinned and turned back to the woman. Lucas wants to know if you'd like him to teach you how to sign grandmother. He says it's never too late to learn. What followed was an impromptu sign language lesson right in the middle of the cafe. Lucas patiently showed the boys and their mother several basic signs, with Danny serving as translator and demonstrator. Even Tommy, initially the most resistant, found himself fascinated by the fluid movements and the way Lucas could tell entire stories with his hands. David and Maria watched from nearby, both amazed by Danny's newfound confidence. This was the child Maria remembered from before the accident, outgoing, eager to share knowledge, protective of his friends. Lucas has given him more than just sign language, David observed quietly. He's given him a way to feel special again instead of feeling broken. After the other family left, promising to check out sign language books from the library, Danny was practically glowing with pride. He settled back into the reading corner with Lucas, but instead of just listening to a story, he began telling one of his own. Once upon a time, Danny began, using both his voice and the signs he'd learned, there was a boy who forgot how to use words because something scary happened to him. Lucas watched intently, occasionally offering a sign when Danny struggled to express something. But then, Danny continued, the boy met another boy who showed him that words aren't the only way to talk. The second boy taught him that hands can speak and eyes can listen and hearts can understand even when ears can't hear. Lucas's eyes lit up with understanding, and he began adding to the story through sign language. Danny interpreted. Lucas says the two boys became best friends and taught everyone they met that being different isn't something to be afraid of. And they lived happily ever after, Danny concluded, because they learned that the best friendships happen when people help each other be brave. Sarah, the barista, had been listening from behind the counter and was wiping away tears. She approached with 2 cups of hot chocolate topped with extra whipped cream. This is for the best storytellers in the cafe, she announced. And I want you both to know that you've taught me something important today, too. That evening, Danny asked Maria if he could call Dr. Martinez to tell her about his day. During the phone call, which lasted nearly 30 minutes, Danny spoke more than he had in the entire 3 months following the accident combined. I think I'm ready to go back to school, he told Maria that night as she tucked him into bed. I want to teach my classmates some sign language like Lucas taught me. Maybe they won't think different is scary if they understand it better. Maria kissed his forehead, marveling at how much her son had grown in just a few short weeks. What made you feel ready? She asked. Danny considered the question seriously. Lucas showed me that I'm not broken, he said finally. I just needed to find new ways to be me. And now I want to help other kids find their ways too. As Maria turned off the light, Danny added one more thing. Mom, I think Lucas saved me, but I think maybe I helped save him a little too. Maria smiled in the darkness, knowing that both boys had indeed saved each other in ways that would shape the rest of their lives. Danny's return to school was scheduled for a Monday morning in early November. The weekend before, he spent hours practicing what he wanted to say to his teacher and classmates. Lucas came over on Sunday afternoon to help him prepare, bringing along a poster they had made together, showing basic sign language alphabet and common words. "Remember," Lucas signed to Danny with David translating, "if you get nervous, just breathe and think about our story in the cafe. You have something special to share." Mrs. Henderson, Danny's third-grade teacher, had been briefed about his progress and was prepared to support his transition back into the classroom. What she wasn't prepared for was the confident child who walked into her classroom carrying a colorful poster and requesting to address the class. "I'd like to tell everyone about my friend Lucas," Danny announced during morning circle time. "And I want to teach you about sign language." The classroom fell silent. These children had known Danny before the accident as a talkative, energetic classmate who loved to share stories. They had also whispered among themselves about Silent Danny, who had stopped talking after the car crash. Now here he was, speaking clearly and purposefully about something that obviously meant a great deal to him. Danny unrolled his poster and propped it against the easel. "My friend Lucas is deaf," he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of this moment. "That means he can't hear sounds like we can. But Lucas isn't sad about it, and he's not missing out on anything. He taught me that there are lots of ways to communicate." He demonstrated the sign for hello, encouraging his classmates to try it. One by one, hands went up around the circle as children attempted the gesture. "Lucas can tell amazing stories." Without making any sounds, Danny continued, warming to his subject. "He taught me that faces and hands can be just as expressive as voices, maybe even more expressive." Sarah Martinez, a quiet girl who rarely spoke in class, raised her hand tentatively. "Can you teach us how to sign our names?" What followed was Danny's first real triumph since returning to school. He spent the next 20 minutes teaching his classmates basic signs, sharing stories about his friendship with Lucas, and answering questions with an enthusiasm that reminded Mrs. Henderson why he had always been one of her favorite students. The most powerful moment came when Marcus, a boy who had been one of Danny's closest friends before the accident, asked, "Were you scared when you couldn't talk anymore?" Danny considered the question seriously. "Yes," he said finally. "I was very scared. It felt like the words got stuck somewhere inside me, and I didn't know how to get them out again. But Lucas showed me that even when you're scared or different, you can still connect with people. Sometimes being different is actually a superpower." Mrs. Henderson decided to extend the impromptu lesson into art time, having the children create their own sign language cards to take home. The enthusiasm was infectious, with children helping each other perfect their hand shapes and practicing simple conversations. During recess, something beautiful happened. Instead of the usual chaos of playground games, small groups of children gathered to practice their new signs. Danny found himself at the center of attention in the best possible way, not as the boy who had been in an accident, but as the boy who knew something special and was willing to share it. Tommy, one of the boys from the cafe encounter, approached Danny hesitantly. "I'm sorry I called you Silent Danny before," he said. "That was mean." "It's okay," Danny replied, then added, with a grin, "But maybe you could call me Sign Language Danny now instead." That afternoon, Danny called Lucas as soon as he got home from school, bursting with excitement to share every detail of his day. David helped translate as Lucas's hands moved rapidly with his own excitement and pride in his friend's success. "Lucas wants to know if your classmates would like him to visit sometime," David relayed. "He could bring some books and teach them more advanced signs." "Really?" Danny's eyes went wide. "Mrs. Henderson would love that. Can we ask her tomorrow?" The school visit was arranged for the following Friday. Lucas arrived with a backpack full of picture books, educational posters, and a warm smile that immediately won over the third-grade class. What Maria and David witnessed that day was something neither had expected. Their sons had become teachers, sharing not just sign language but lessons about acceptance, friendship, and finding strength in differences. Lucas taught the children songs in sign language, showed them how to fingerspell their names fluently, and told interactive stories where the children played different characters through gestures and expressions. Danny served as interpreter and co-teacher, seamlessly bridging the communication gap between his two worlds. The most touching moment came during story time when Lucas began telling the tale of two boys who met in a cafe. One who had lost his voice and one who had never heard sound, but who discovered they could understand each other perfectly. As he signed, Danny translated, but the story needed little interpretation. The emotion and connection between the boys was visible to everyone in the room. The boys learned, Danny translated as Lucas's hands moved gracefully, that friendship doesn't need perfect words or perfect hearing. It just needs two people who care enough to find a way to understand each other. After the presentation, Mrs. Henderson pulled Maria aside. "I've been teaching for 15 years, she said, and I've never seen anything like what these two boys have accomplished together. Danny hasn't just recovered from his trauma, he's discovered something profound about human connection. And Lucas, he's opened our entire classroom to a new understanding of what communication really means." That evening, the two families celebrated with dinner at the cafe where it all began. Sarah, the barista, had prepared a special cake with "Friendship Has No Words" written in frosting, and the boys' usual table was decorated with drawings from their classmates. As they sat together, Danny looked around at the familiar space that had become so important in his healing journey. "Dad," he said to David, using the sign name Lucas had taught him. "Thank you for bringing Lucas to the cafe that first day." David smiled, understanding both the spoken words and the signed gesture. "Thank you, Danny, for showing Lucas that his differences could be gifts to share with others." Lucas beamed and signed something that made both boys laugh. When Maria asked for a translation, Danny grinned. He said that he thinks we should start a sign language club at school. He wants to teach other kids so they can talk to deaf people they meet and won't be afraid of people who are different. What had started as one boy's journey back from trauma had become a mission to build bridges of understanding. And it all began with two children who proved that sometimes the most important conversations happen without words at all. The Sign Language Club became a reality faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks of Lucas's classroom visit, Mrs. Henderson had approval from the principal, and 12 enthusiastic third graders signed up. The club met every Thursday after school in the library, with Danny and Lucas as co-leaders and David volunteering as the adult supervisor. What started as a simple language learning club evolved into something much more meaningful. Word spread throughout the elementary school, and soon children from other grades were asking to join. By December, they had 25 members ranging from kindergarten to 5th grade. The club's first real test came when they decided to perform at the winter holiday assembly. Danny suggested they sign a popular children's song while a narrator read the words aloud, making it accessible to both hearing and deaf audience members. Lucas was thrilled by the idea, and immediately began choreographing hand movements that told a story through gesture. Preparation for the performance brought challenges neither boy had anticipated. Some of the younger children struggled with the precise hand movements, and coordinating 25 children to sign in unison proved difficult. There were moments when Danny felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of leading such a large group. During one particularly frustrating practice session, when half the kindergartners were signing at the wrong time and 2 5th graders were arguing about hand placement, Danny felt his old anxiety creeping back. His breathing became shallow, and for a moment, the familiar fear of not being able to communicate effectively returned. Lucas noticed immediately. He approached Danny and began signing slowly and clearly, his face calm and reassuring. Danny watched his friend's hands and felt his panic subside. "What did he say?" asked Emma, one of the kindergartners who had been struggling with the timing. "He reminded me that we're not trying to be perfect," Danny translated, his voice steadier now. "We're trying to show people that communication comes from the heart, not from getting every gesture exactly right." This became the club's new philosophy. Instead of focusing on flawless technique, they emphasized expression and emotion. Lucas taught them that in sign language, facial expressions and body language were just as important as hand movements. Danny helped the younger children understand that making mistakes was part of learning, just like it had been part of his own journey back to speaking. The week before the performance, an unexpected visitor arrived at their Thursday practice. Mrs. Chen, Lucas's grandmother, had flown in from California to watch her grandson's performance. She was completely deaf and had been since birth, communicating exclusively through sign language. Danny watched in fascination as Lucas and his grandmother had an animated conversation, their hands moving rapidly in patterns far more complex than anything he had learned. When David introduced Danny to Mrs. Chen, she studied his face carefully before signing something to Lucas. "Grandmother says she can see in your eyes that you understand the power of silent communication," Lucas translated for Danny. "She wants to know if you'd like to learn some advanced signs to use in your performance." Working with Mrs. Chen opened up a new dimension of sign language for Danny and the other club members. She showed them how to sign with emotion, how to use space and movement to create drama, and how to make their audience feel the story they were telling rather than just see it. Most importantly, she shared her own experiences of being deaf in a hearing world, helping the children understand that their sign language club was about more than just learning a new skill. It was about building bridges of understanding and acceptance. The night of the winter assembly, the auditorium was packed with families, teachers, and community members. Danny stood backstage with his club members, his heart pounding with familiar pre-performance nerves. But when he looked over at Lucas, who couldn't even hear the audience's chatter but was beaming with excitement, Danny felt his confidence return. Their performance exceeded everyone's expectations. The song they had chosen, "You've Got a Friend in Me," came alive through their coordinated signing. Danny served as the narrator, his voice clear and strong as he spoke the lyrics while the club members signed the story of friendship and support. The most powerful moment came during the bridge of the song, when Danny and Lucas moved to center stage together. Danny spoke about how friendship can overcome any barrier while Lucas told the same story through sign language. Their presentation was so synchronized and heartfelt that the audience was completely silent, hanging on every word and gesture. But the real magic happened during the final verse. Mrs. Chen, who had been sitting in the front row, stood up and began signing along with her grandson and his friends. Her movements were graceful and expressive, decades of experience evident in every gesture. Soon other deaf community members who had come to support the performance joined in, creating a moment of unity that brought many audience members to tears. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Danny looked out at the crowd and saw his mother crying happy tears, David beaming with pride, and Dr. Martinez nodding approvingly from the back of the auditorium. But most importantly, he saw faces filled with understanding and appreciation, people who had been touched by what they had witnessed. After the performance, the club was surrounded by families and community members asking questions about sign language and expressing interest in learning more. The librarian announced that the school would be starting adult sign language classes in the new year, and several local businesses inquired about making their services more accessible to deaf customers. As the evening wound down, Danny found himself sitting in the quiet auditorium with Lucas and Mrs. Chen. Through Lucas's translation, she shared something that would stay with Danny for the rest of his life. "Grandmother says that healing often comes in circles," Lucas interpreted. "You came to Lucas needing to find your voice again, and in teaching you sign language, he found new ways to share his own voice. Now together, you're helping your whole community find new voices they didn't know they had." Danny looked around the auditorium where an hour earlier, hearing and deaf community members had joined together in a moment of perfect communication. He thought about how far he had come from the silent, scared boy who couldn't speak after the accident. "Lucas," he said, using both his voice and sign language simultaneously, "I think we did something really important tonight." Lucas grinned and signed back, "I think we're just getting started." Mrs. Chen smiled at both boys, her hands moving in what Danny now recognized as a blessing in sign language. Even without perfect translation, he understood that she was acknowledging their friendship as something special, something that had the power to change not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. The winter assembly performance became legendary at their school, but for Danny, it represented something more personal. The moment he realized that his trauma had not just been healed, but transformed into a gift he could share with the world. 2 years later, the Sign Language Club had grown into something neither Danny nor Lucas could have imagined. What started as 12 third graders meeting in the school library had become a district-wide program with over 200 student participants across 5 elementary schools. Danny, now in 5th grade, served as a student ambassador, traveling to other schools to help start new clubs. The Tuesday morning cafe tradition continued, though now it often included other children from the club and their families. Sarah, the barista, had learned basic sign language to better serve her deaf customers, and the cafe had become an unofficial community center for families learning about deaf culture and sign language. On this particular Tuesday in spring, Danny and Lucas sat in their familiar corner, but they weren't alone. 3 new children had joined them. A shy kindergartner named Emma, whose older brother was deaf, twins from 2nd grade whose grandmother had recently lost her hearing, and Marcus, Danny's old friend who had become fascinated by sign language and was considering it as a possible career path. Danny watched Lucas patiently teach the newcomers basic greetings, remembering his own first fumbling attempts at signing 2 years earlier. The patient way Lucas corrected hand positions and celebrated small victories reminded Danny of how far they had both come. "Do you remember?" Danny said to Lucas, using the fluid combination of speech and sign that had become natural to both. "Boys, when I was too scared to even try to sign dinosaur?" Lucas laughed, his hands moving expressively as he replied, "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met, even though you were scared. It takes courage to try something new when you're hurting." Emma, the kindergartner, looked up from practicing the alphabet. "Were you really scared, Danny? You seem so confident now." Danny considered how to answer. At 11 years old, he had learned that honesty about difficult experiences could help others feel less alone. "I was terrified," he told Emma gently. "After my accident, I felt like words had abandoned me. I thought if I tried to talk and nothing came out, it would prove that I was broken forever. But Lucas showed me that being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're facing something new." Lucas nodded and added through sign, "And Danny taught me that having a disability doesn't make you different in a bad way. It just makes you different in an interesting way. Together we learned that our differences could help other people." The conversation was interrupted by David approaching their table with an excited expression and his phone in hand. "Boys, I just got off the phone with someone from the state education department," he announced. "They've heard about your sign language program and want to feature it in a documentary about innovative inclusion programs in schools." Danny and Lucas exchanged amazed looks. A documentary seemed impossibly big and important. "They want to follow you for a few weeks," David continued, "to show how the program works and interview families who have been impacted by it." Over the next month, cameras followed Danny and Lucas through their regular activities. They filmed club meetings, classroom visits, and the boys' ongoing Tuesday cafe tradition. The filmmakers interviewed Maria about Danny's recovery, David about raising a deaf child, Mrs. Henderson about the program's impact on her classroom, and Mrs. Chen about the importance of deaf representation. But the most powerful interviews were with the children and families whose lives had been touched by the Sign Language Club. Tommy, the boy who had once called Danny Silent Danny, was now fluent in basic sign language and volunteering at a local deaf community center. Sarah Martinez, the quiet girl from Danny's class, had blossomed into a confident young leader of the kindergarten sign language group. The film crew also captured a moment that perfectly illustrated the program's impact. During one of their regular filming days, an elderly man came into the cafe looking frustrated and upset. He was trying to order coffee but couldn't communicate effectively with the teenage barista who had no sign language experience. Lucas immediately noticed the situation and approached the man, signing a polite greeting. The man's face lit up with relief and gratitude as he began signing back. Danny joined them, serving as interpreter between Lucas and the hearing barista to ensure the man got exactly the coffee order he wanted. "This is what we hoped would happen," Danny explained to the camera afterward. "We wanted to create a community where deaf people don't feel left out, and where hearing people aren't afraid to try to communicate." The documentary, titled Silent Voices, Loud Impact, premiered 6 months later at the State Education Conference. Danny and Lucas, along with their families, attended the screening in a large auditorium filled with teachers, administrators, and education policymakers. Watching their story unfold on the big screen was surreal. Danny saw himself as he had been 2 years earlier, silent, withdrawn, afraid, and marveled at the journey. But what moved him most was seeing Lucas's quiet patience and unwavering friendship documented so beautifully. The film ended with a scene from their most recent school assembly, where the sign language club had grown to include nearly half the school student body. As the credits rolled, the auditorium erupted in applause. During the question and answer session afterward, an administrator from a neighboring district asked, "What advice would you give to other communities wanting to start similar programs?" Danny looked at Lucas, then stood to address the audience. His voice was strong and clear, with no trace of the fear that had once silenced him. "Start small," he said. "Find one person who needs a friend, and be brave enough to communicate with them however you can." Lucas and I started with one book in a cafe reading corner. 2 years later, we have a program that's changing lives across our entire district. Lucas added through sign language, with Danny interpreting. And remember that teaching someone else is the best way to learn something yourself. We became teachers before we were experts, and that's when the real magic happened. After the premiere, many people approached them with stories of how the documentary had inspired them to learn sign language or start inclusion programs in their own communities. Danny realized that their friendship, born in a quiet cafe moment between two hurting children, had become something much larger than either of them had ever imagined. That night, as the families celebrated at their original cafe, Danny reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The reading corner where he and Lucas first connected now held a small plaque reading, "Where Friendship Has No Words," a gift from the cafe owner in honor of what had started there. "Lucas," Danny said, using the comfortable blend of speech and sign that felt most natural to him now. "Do you think we really changed all these people's lives, or do you think they changed ours?" Lucas smiled and replied, "I think when you help someone find their voice, you discover parts of your own voice you never knew existed. We all changed each other." Maria, watching her son from across the cafe, marveled at the confident, compassionate young man he had become. The scared, silent child seemed like a distant memory, replaced by someone who used his voice, both spoken and signed, to build bridges and create understanding. David caught her eye and raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "To the power of friendship," he said quietly. "And to the courage to communicate," Maria replied, "even when it's scary." At their usual table, Danny and Lucas continued their conversation, hands moving gracefully through the air, voices weaving together in perfect harmony. Around them, the cafe hummed with the quiet conversations of families who had found their way to this special place, because two boys had proven that sometimes the most profound connections happen in moments of complete understanding, where words are optional, but hearts speak fluently to one another. The documentary would go on to win awards and inspire programs across the country. But for Danny and Lucas, the real victory had happened much earlier, in those first tentative moments when a traumatized boy learned to trust again, and a deaf child discovered that his differences were gifts worth sharing. Their friendship had indeed brought Danny back to life, one silent moment at a time. But in the process, they had both learned that healing others is often the most powerful path to healing yourself.